The fluorescent lights of the courtroom seemed to amplify Clara's shriek as she lunged, her manicured fingers grazing my ear. I flinched, ducking behind my lawyer, the crowd's murmurs a hot flush on my neck. "He's nothing but a gold-digging hick," she spat, her voice cracking, and a wave of raw shame washed over me. The image of Clara's contorted face, red with rage, lingered even as I settled into the quiet hum of my memories. It had been years since I first saw her, a stark contrast to the woman who now tried to scratch my eyes out in open court. Back then, my life was simple, predictable. I was Hank Olson, an assistant manager at Summit Sports, living in a functional one-bedroom apartment on the west side of town. My days were spent helping customers pick out hiking boots, organizing inventory, and sometimes adjusting a bicycle chain. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and offered a discount on gear I actually used. I met Clara Jensen at a charity gala for some obscure environmental cause, an event I attended only because our store sponsored a table. I felt out of place among the silk dresses and tailored suits. She was there too, looking bored, nursing a sparkling water. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my car, but her eyes held a restless energy. I was trying to look interested in a silent auction item, a framed photograph of a snow leopard, when she drifted over. "Do these boots actually work?" she asked, pointing to my worn leather hikers, "or are they just for show?" Her question caught me off guard. Most people just ignored the practical footwear. I explained the merits of proper ankle support for uneven terrain, the importance of good traction. We talked for an hour, leaning against a velvet rope, the clinking of glasses and polite laughter fading into the background. She seemed genuinely curious, a stark contrast to the polite but distant chatter I'd heard all night. She liked the idea of something real, something grounded. Our courtship was a whirlwind. We went hiking in the state parks, me pointing out tracks and identifying trees, she laughing when she stumbled on a route. We ate at hole-in-the-wall diners, places where the coffee was strong and the pie crust flaky. She'd shed her designer clothes for faded jeans and a baseball cap, her elaborate hair pulled back in a ponytail. She seemed to enjoy the authenticity, the lack of pretense. For a while, it felt like she was shedding her entire vintage persona, revealing something simpler underneath. Then came the inevitable meeting with her parents, Walter and Martha Jensen. Their estate was a sprawling brick edifice surrounded by manicured lawns, a world away from my modest apartment complex. Walter greeted me with a handshake that was less a greeting and more a test of strength, his grip deliberate and crushing. Martha's eyes, a startling blue, scanned me with a precision that felt surgical. "Sporting goods?" Walter asked, his tone flat, as if I'd announced a career in stamp collecting. They sat me down in a study filled with dark wood and leather-bound books. "What does your father do, Hank?" Martha inquired, her voice smooth but edged with curiosity. I told them about my father's quiet life as a retired high school shop teacher. Their faces remained impassive, but I could feel their assessment, a thinly veiled disdain for my middle-class background, for my lack of an ancestral trust fund or a prestigious university degree. It was clear they expected more for their daughter. Clara, however, was stubborn. She insisted on moving into my small apartment after we'd been dating for about a year. Her parents, of course, found this wholly unacceptable. The compromise came quickly, disguised as a gesture of generosity. Walter and Martha offered to help with a down payment on a condo for tax purposes, they explained, insisting on co-ownership. I didn't like it, but Clara argued it was the only way they'd ever relent. I conceded, wanting peace, wanting Clara. I proposed a few months later with a modest antique ring I'd found in a pawn shop. It wasn't flashy, but it felt genuine. Clara teared up, then smiled a little sadly. "They'll fight this," she warned, "but I don't care." The announcement at a tense family dinner was met with Walter's grim nod of resignation, Martha's pursed lips, and a silence that stretched for an uncomfortable minute. The prenup meeting followed. The documents were thick, legalistic, presented by a lawyer with an impeccably tailored suit and a condescending smile. He explained clauses about asset division, alimony, future earnings. I skimmed through pages of jargon until a particular phrase caught my eye. Any and all windfalls, including but not limited to lottery winnings, shall be considered marital property. I looked up, confused. "Why the focus on lottery tickets?" I asked. The lawyer offered a dismissive shrug, and Clara, sensing my unease, squeezed my hand under the table. "It's just legal stuff, Hank," she murmured. "They put everything in these things." I signed up mostly to prove I wasn't a fortune hunter, that I loved her for her, not for the Jensen name or their money. Our wedding was a collision of worlds. The Jensens spared no expense. A country club reception, an open bar, a band playing jazz standards. My family and friends, mostly from my small hometown, looked a little lost among the crystal and polished silver. My father, a man of few words, pulled me aside during the reception, his hand resting on my shoulder. He looked across the room at Clara, then back at me. "You married her, son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Not them." The first few years of marriage with Clara were a constant negotiation. Weekends that I imagined hiking a new trail often turned into formal brunches at the country club. My suggestions for dinner at the local diner were met with reservations at places where the menus were more descriptive than substantial. I tried to bridge the gap, inviting her to my family's summer potlucks, enduring the polite but awkward silences that followed her comments about the quaintness of our small-town traditions. She came sometimes, but her presence felt like a performance. Clara, on the other hand, thrived in her world. Her social calendar was full, a blur of charity galas, exclusive club events, and trips with her friends to places I'd only seen in magazines. I'd stand by her side at these functions, a quiet observer, making polite small talk about the weather or local sports teams. The conversations around me were of investments, European vacations, and the latest political scandal in D.C. I'd nod, offering a tight smile, feeling increasingly like a piece of furniture in a room too opulent for my taste. At work, I pushed myself. My goal was the store manager position, a solid step up, more responsibility, better pay. I'd started attending evening courses in business management, coming home late, books spread across the kitchen table, but the Jensens had their own way of deflating my efforts. "Still pushing those hiking boots, Hank?" Walter would ask during Sunday dinners, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. "There are easier ways to make a living, you know. Clara could easily set you up with something in one of our portfolios." Martha would chime in, "A man of your practical skills could certainly find a comfortable niche. Why bother with the grind?" Their words, always wrapped in a veneer of concern, felt like a constant dismissal. Clara started spending more time on her interests. She'd be out late at a new art opening or an exclusive wine tasting. I'd come home to the quiet condo, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. A text would arrive around midnight. "Home late, darling. Don't wait up." The shine of our early romance, the shared laughter over simple things, slowly faded into the grind of our disparate realities. The woman who once delighted in greasy diner burgers now barely touched the home-cooked meals I tried to prepare. A quiet dissatisfaction settled over me. Our arguments became more frequent, often circling back to money or, more precisely, to my lack of ambition in Walter's estimation. Clara would echo their sentiments, softer but still pointed. "They just want what's best for us, Hank. A little more drive wouldn't hurt, would it?" She'd throw her hands up, exasperated, when I tried to explain the satisfaction I found in building something, in earning my own way. I started seeking solace in longer hours at work, volunteering for extra shifts, organizing the back storeroom until past closing. The familiar tasks, the smell of new canvas and rubber, offered a quiet comfort. When I couldn't work, I walked. Miles through the quiet residential streets, past houses with porch lights glowing, their windows reflecting snippets of other, seemingly simpler lives. That's when Sarah started at Summit Sports. She was new to the city, fresh out of college, brought in as a sales associate specializing in camping gear. Sarah was pragmatic, down to earth, with a quick, easy laugh. Her hair was usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she knew the difference between a backpacking tent and a car camping tent without having to look it up. She seemed genuinely interested in my ideas, in the inventory reports I painstakingly compiled, in the subtle shifts in customer preferences I observed. Our conversations were easy, familiar. We'd talk about the best places to find untouched hiking trails, the pros and cons of different brands of rain jackets, She listened when I talked about my dream of someday opening my own sustainable outdoor shop, a place focused on quality gear and environmental education. Clara had always humored these aspirations, a gentle pat on the arm, a dismissive, "That's nice, Hank." But Sarah listened, asked follow-up questions, offered suggestions. It felt like someone was truly hearing me for the first time in years. I found myself looking forward to work in a way I hadn't since I first landed the assistant manager job. One evening after a particularly late inventory check, we were the last two left. "Grab a bite?" she asked, already pulling off her work vest. We ended up at a pizza place, the kind with checkered tablecloths and plastic cups. Over lukewarm beer and a greasy pepperoni pie, I laid out my plans for the shop in more detail than I'd ever shared with anyone. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright. "You could really make that work, Hank," she said, her voice sincere. "People want that, you know? Real gear, from someone who knows what they're talking about." There was a moment then as she looked at me, a shared laugh over a silly anecdote about a customer, that a spark ignited. A warmth spread through me, a connection I hadn't felt since those first days with Clara, hiking through the woods, talking about everything and nothing. A pang of guilt, sharp and sudden, pricked at me. I pushed it down, dismissing it as harmless. It was just friendship, a good, solid, much-needed friendship. Sarah and my friendship deepened rapidly, becoming the anchor of my workdays. Shared lunches in the break room turned into detailed discussions about everything from outdoor gear to the quiet ache in our lives. After-work chats stretched longer and longer, sometimes over a coffee, sometimes just in the empty store, the fluorescent lights humming around us. She genuinely listened to my frustrations, not just about Clara, but about the Jensen's subtle jabs, the constant feeling of being judged, the way my own dreams felt perpetually out of reach. Clara would often cut me off with a, "Honey, you worry too much," or "It'll all work out," before pivoting back to her own agenda. Sarah, however, would lean in, her gaze steady, asking, "What do you think you should do?" Or, "How does that make you feel?" I found myself confiding in her more than I ever had with Clara, sharing the quiet anxieties that gnawed at me. Clara, absorbed in planning a new, ambitious charity initiative, remained largely oblivious. She'd occasionally notice a shift in my demeanor. "You seem different, Hank," she'd say, peering at me over the rim of her coffee cup. "Good different. More focused." I'd offer a non-committal grunt, a half smile, and change the subject. The small white lies started then, little deceptions to cover my tracks. Late meeting I'd text or inventory check ran long. Each lie was a tiny chip in the foundation of my marriage, barely noticeable at first, but accumulating. The first time we touched, it was accidental. We were reaching for the same box of climbing ropes, our hands brushing. An electric current, sharp and unexpected, ran through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, feeling a blush creep up my neck. Sarah just smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that made my stomach clench. One cold Tuesday evening, after everyone else had left the store, we found ourselves in her car, parked in the deserted lot. We'd been talking for hours, the conversation drifting from work to life, circling closer and closer to the things we rarely spoke aloud. The silence grew heavy, filled with unspoken anxieties. "Sometimes," Sarah said, staring out at the rain-slicked pavement, "I feel incredibly alone." Her voice was soft, vulnerable, I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Me too," I admitted, the words escaping before I could pull them back. We talked about the quiet loneliness in our relationships, the feeling of being unseen, unheard. She admitted her boyfriend, a high-achieving lawyer, was often distant, preoccupied. It was a shared vulnerability, a bond forged in the quiet darkness of the car. Then, the kiss. It was unexpected, a sudden movement in the quiet solitude. Her hand found mine, and she leaned across the console, her lips soft against mine. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was a hungry, powerful kiss that tasted of longing and unspoken words. It was miles from home, from Clara, from everything I was supposed to be. My mind screamed at me, but my body responded, a rush of excitement so potent it made my head swim. Then just as quickly, the crushing wave of guilt hit. It was a physical ache in my chest, a cold knot in my stomach. I pulled back, breathing hard, my eyes fixed on the dashboard. Sarah, I choked out, my voice rough. This is a mistake. My words felt hollow, a desperate attempt to undo something that was already done. I didn't mean it, not entirely. A part of me, a deep, selfish part, had reveled in that kiss. I drove home in a daze, the scent of her perfume lingering on my clothes, the phantom taste of her lips still on mine. The condo was dark, quiet. Clara was already asleep, her breathing even, undisturbed. I slipped into bed beside her, the sheets feeling cold and unfamiliar. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own bed, in my own life. The internal conflict raged. The man I thought I was, loyal, dependable, simple, was being dismantled, brick by the man I was becoming. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was harmless, a temporary escape from the suffocating pressure of my life. Just a moment of weakness, a single regrettable lapse. But the line was blurring rapidly, fading into a hazy gray, and I knew deep down that one kiss was never enough. The affair with Sarah began in earnest, a clandestine life woven tightly around our work schedules. It was a series of stolen moments, hurried lunches in her car, hushed phone calls from empty storerooms, and late-night drives that stretched into early mornings. We shared secrets, fears, and dreams that I hadn't known I possessed. With Sarah, I felt alive again, an energy coursing through me that had long been dormant. But it came with a perpetual edge, a constant awareness of the precariousness of my situation. It was a paradox. In Sarah's presence, I felt more myself than I had in years. Open, honest, heard. Yet every moment we shared was built upon a lie, a carefully constructed facade I maintained for the rest of my life. The man Sarah knew was vibrant, hopeful. The man Clara knew was increasingly distant, preoccupied. Clara, to her credit, began to notice. Her questions were gentle at first. "You seem a little quiet lately, Hank. Everything all right at work?" I'd mumble something about a difficult supplier or a new inventory system. She attributed my emotional distance to stress from work, or perhaps the ongoing tension with her parents, which was a constant low hum in our lives. She tried to reconnect, suggesting weekends away, a trip to a bed and breakfast, or even just a movie night. But I always found an excuse: too much work, too tired, a commitment I'd conveniently forgotten. The guilt would prick at me, a dull throb, but the pull towards Sarah, the relief I found in her company, was stronger. Meanwhile, Walter Jensen's pressure mounted. He made it clear during one particularly stifling Sunday dinner that it was time for me to step up. "Blake Development could use a man with your work ethic, Hank," he stated, his voice heavy with expectation. "It's time you started thinking about what's best for the family. Clara's family, that is." He implied it was my duty now, as part of the family, to join their firm, to align myself with their ambitions. I resisted, clinging stubbornly to my dream of an outdoor shop, a place of my own, built on my own terms. My resistance only fueled Walter's disapproval, hardening his already formidable gaze. "Stubbornness is a luxury some of us can't afford, son," he'd often say. The weight of my double life started to tell. I was perpetually tired, even after a full night's sleep. At home, I was irritable, quick to snap at minor inconveniences, barely able to hide my detachment. But with Sarah, I was vibrant, laughing freely, discussing everything with an intensity I hadn't known I still possessed. The contrast was stark, a clear delineation of the two men I had become. One evening, after another stolen dinner, Sarah looked at me across the small table, her eyes earnest. "I love you, Hank," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I want a future with you. What are we doing?" Her question hung in the air, weighty and terrifying. I was torn, paralyzed by the thought of leaving Clara. The financial fallout alone was daunting. The Jensen's wrath, I knew, would be swift and merciless. They would dismantle me, not just financially, but reputationally. "It's not that simple, Sarah," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash. I confided in her about the prenup, about the strange clause regarding windfalls like lottery winnings. I even managed a bitter laugh. "Imagine that, winning the lottery, like that's ever going to happen to me." We both chuckled, dismissing it as a ridiculous, unlikely scenario. It was just another piece of paper, another obstacle in a life full of them. The inevitable confrontation with Clara came weeks later. It was late, past midnight, when I finally returned home after telling her I was working late on inventory. She was waiting for me in the living room, a stack of unopened mail on the coffee table, her face drawn. "Where have you been, Hank?" she asked, her voice tight, barely controlled. "And don't tell me inventory again. You've been evasive for months." The argument quickly escalated. Her voice rose, laced with frustration, and mine with a desperate need to deflect. "Maybe if your parents weren't constantly breathing down my neck," I shot back, the words biting, "telling me how to live my life, criticizing every move I make, I wouldn't feel so goddamn suffocated." It was a brutal deflection, unfair and untrue, but in that moment, it was the only defense I had. It was a Tuesday late afternoon, the kind of gray, unremarkable day that blended into all the others. I stopped for gas at the corner station, the same one I always used. As the numbers on the pump clicked upward, my eyes drifted to the small dispenser inside the convenience store window. On a whim, something I almost never did, I walked in and bought a single scratch-off lottery ticket. It was a $5 ticket, a picture of a shining gold bar on the front, just a momentary distraction. I got back in my truck, parked away from the pumps, and started scratching. The first few numbers revealed nothing, and then a match, then another. My heart started to beat faster. I uncovered the final number, and then the prize amount. The zeros stretched out across the ticket more than I could immediately process. It was a significant jackpot, enough to change everything. Initial euphoria, a dizzying rush of possibility, washed over me. My outdoor shop, free and clear, a new life. Then a cold dread snaked its way through my veins. The prenup, the lawyer's smirking face, the ridiculous clause that I joked about with Sarah. Lottery winnings and would be considered marital property subject to division. The exact words echoed in my head, clear as a bell. I folded the ticket carefully, tucking it deep into my wallet, then into the inner pocket of my jacket. My mind raced, a frantic scramble of fear and calculation. The stakes of my secret life, of my burgeoning affair, had just become astronomically higher. This wasn't just about leaving a marriage now, it was about escaping with my future intact. The first person I called, from a payphone at a truck stop miles out of town, was Sarah. I told her about the win, my voice barely above a whisper, recounting the disbelief, then the chilling realization. She listened patiently. "Hank," she said, her voice calm, practical, "you have to be honest with Clara. It's the right thing to do." Her words were a small, sharp stab of conscience, but honesty felt like a trap. Was this my chance to escape the Jensen's suffocating influence? To finally build the life I wanted? Or was it a cruel twist of fate, a new leash tied around my neck, stronger than the last? I struggled with the moral implications. The money felt like a golden cage offering freedom and imprisonment all at once. I decided to keep the win secret, at least temporarily. I needed time to figure out my next move, to understand the legal landscape. The ticket remained hidden, a constant, heavy presence in my pocket, a secret burning a hole through me. Around this time, Clara, still sensing my continued distance, made a grand gesture. She booked a romantic trip to a secluded cabin up north, a place she'd seen in a magazine. "Just us," she said, trying to infuse warmth into her voice. "A chance to reconnect, away from everything." Her efforts, however misguided, sparked an immense guilt in me. I smiled, nodded, and tried to act enthusiastic, all the while knowing I was carrying this massive, life-altering secret. My evenings, once spent with Sarah or walking to clear my head, now involved subtle research. I spent hours in front of my laptop, after Clara had gone to bed, delving into divorce laws, reading articles about prenuptial agreements, specifically focusing on windfall clauses. How enforceable was it? Could I fight it? Every legal definition, every case study felt like another weight added to my burden. The lottery ticket in my pocket, still folded neatly, felt heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. The irony was bitter, almost cruel. The very thing I had signed away, Dismissing it as an unlikely, insignificant clause now dictated my entire future. It was the linchpin, the ultimate test. As these choices began to stack up, each one leading further down an uncertain path, I found myself wondering if honesty was ever truly an option. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The quiet facade of my double life shattered with the suddenness of a dropped plate. Clara's suspicions, honed by weeks of my evasiveness, led her to hire a private investigator. I never saw him, never suspected. He worked silently, efficiently, gathering irrefutable evidence. Photos of Sarah and me walking hand in hand out of a diner. Time-stamped reports of my truck parked outside her apartment late at night. Recordings of hushed phone calls from my work phone, caught by some listening device he must have planted. The report, a thick manila envelope filled with damning proof, landed on Clara's doorstep one morning. Her initial shock, I later learned, quickly gave way to an incandescent rage that simmered beneath a veneer of icy calm. The lottery ticket's existence, too, chose that week to reveal itself. I had, in a moment of desperate strategizing, confided in my closest work friend, a guy named Mike. I'd sworn him to secrecy, of course, a desperate plea for advice. But secrets, especially big ones involving life-altering money, have a way of leaking. Mike, in a moment of drunken indiscretion at a local bar, told a mutual acquaintance who in turn told another. By the time it reached Clara, it was a distorted whisper, but the core fact remained. I had won, and I had hidden it. The combination of the affair and the hidden lottery wins sent Clara into a furious tailspin. I walked into the condo that evening, tired from a long day, my mind still grappling with how to untangle my mess. The air in the living room was thick, charged with an unspoken tension. Clara stood by the window, her back to me, perfectly still. Then she turned. In her hand, she held a photograph. Sarah and me, laughing over a pizza, our hands close on the table. Beside it, spread across the polished surface of the coffee table, was a copy of my winning lottery ticket. My stomach dropped, cold and hard. "You lying bastard," she whispered, her voice dangerously low, almost a hiss. "You really thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Her eyes, usually so composed, were wild with fury. A heavy crystal vase, a wedding gift from her parents, suddenly sailed through the air, narrowly missing my head, and shattered against the wall behind me, sending shards of glass glittering across the carpet. "You betrayed me," she screamed, her voice cracking, unleashing months of repressed anger. "My family, everything we built. And for what? Some little slut from your discount sporting goods store?" She advanced on me, her words like daggers. "And the money! You actually thought you could hide it? You calculating, greedy son of a bitch. You planned this from day one, didn't you? Waited for your big score so you could just walk away." I was cornered, my lies exposed, stripped bare. There was no denying it, no deflection possible. The photos, the ticket, the shattered vase, it was all irrefutable. "Clara, I can explain," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. But there was no explanation, no justification that could stand against the tidal wave of her wrath. I was forced to admit the affair, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Walter and Martha Jensen were immediately informed. I heard the frantic phone calls from Clara's lawyer, the muffled shouts from the other end. Their reaction was one of absolute fury, a sense of profound family humiliation that I, the outsider, had brought upon their pristine name. Walter's call came an hour later, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the phone. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Hank," he promised, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I will ruin you, financially, reputationally. You won't have a dime left, and you'll never work in this town again." Clara, still shaking, stood before me, her face pale but resolute. "I will take everything," she declared, her voice firm. "Especially that lottery money, every single cent of it. You deserve nothing, you calculating bastard. You're going to regret this for the rest of your miserable life." The lines were drawn. The battlefield was set. The battle for divorce, for money, and for pride had just begun. The divorce proceedings commenced with the subtlety of a freight train. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was a high-stakes public spectacle, orchestrated by the Jensens with cold, calculated precision. Clara's lawyers, a sharp, unyielding team backed by the formidable Jensen legal firm, zeroed in on two main points: my infidelity and the hidden lottery winnings. They painted a picture of me as a textbook gold digger, a man who married into wealth, enjoyed its privileges, and then, upon discovering his own fortune, tried to betray his wife and hide the windfall. Every nuance of our prenup, every interaction I had with Clara's family, was twisted to support this narrative. They argued I had signed the prenup to appear selfless, only to then use my simple background as a mask for my true avaricious intentions. My lawyer, a small-town attorney named Brenda Jenkins, worked tirelessly. She was outmatched in resources but fought with a quiet tenacity. She argued that the lottery clause, buried deep within a complex legal document given to a man of limited legal understanding, was unusual, possibly even coercive. She pointed out that lottery winnings were rarely specifically addressed in prenups, suggesting it spoke to a deeper suspicion on the Jensen's part from the start. The court scrutinized the specific language of the prenup, focusing heavily on the phrase, unexpected financial gains. Weeks blurred into a parade of testimonies, each one more brutal than the last. Details of my affair with Sarah were laid bare, dissected, and paraded for public consumption. The photos, the phone records, the private investigators' reports, all of it became fodder for the court, causing immense public humiliation for both me and Sarah. Sarah, who had been an unwitting participant in the genesis of my lies, faced professional repercussions. Her job at Summit Sports became untenable, the whispers and stares too much to bear. She left town, forced out by the public shaming, despite her complete innocence in the initial fraud. Her face, tear-streaked and hollow during her brief, reluctant testimony, was a constant source of agony for me. Clara's testimony was powerful. She was a broken woman, she told the court, a heartbroken victim of a calculated betrayal. Her voice trembled as she recounted my coldness, my lease, her desperate attempts to salvage our marriage. She wept openly, her performance convincing, garnering public sympathy and casting me further into the role of the villain. I sat there day after day listening to the accusations, feeling the moral weight of my actions press down on me. The damage I'd caused, the lives I'd upended, felt insurmountable. The quiet satisfaction I once found in my work, in my simple life, was gone, replaced by a constant gnawing guilt. The Jensens weren't content with merely winning in court. They orchestrated a relentless media smear campaign, leveraging their connections to ensure local newspapers and news channels painted me in the darkest possible light. My name became synonymous with greed and deceit, my reputation utterly destroyed. The legal fees mounted, a staggering sum that drained my remaining savings and threatened to plunge me into ruinous debt. Every bill from Brenda, every court filing, chipped away at whatever financial future I might have hoped for. The lottery money, once a beacon of freedom, now felt like a curse, its value dwarfed by the cost of fighting for it. Then came the day of the verdict. The judge's voice was dry, detached, as he read out his decision. My mind drifted back to the opening day of the trial, to Clara's furious lunge across the courtroom, her face contorted with rage. The gavel pounded, a final definitive sound, and the courtroom erupted in chaos, a blur of shouting and flashing cameras. Clara, her eyes burning with triumph, lunged at me again, her manicured fingers grazing my ear, her shriek echoing through the space. "He's nothing but a gold-digging hick!" she screamed, her voice cracking. It was the same accusation, the same raw shame, the same crushing defeat, all over again. The judge's voice was monotone, clinical, as he delivered the verdict. He spoke at length about the enforceability of the prenup's lottery clause, highlighting the clear language regarding unexpected financial gains as marital property. He recounted the circumstances of my signing, my admission that I understood the document, however reluctantly. The lack of a clear challenge to the clause at the time of signing, he emphasized, weighed heavily in his decision. The decision was largely in Clara's favor. The judge awarded her a significant portion of the lottery winnings, deeming it marital property, directly due to that clause I had dismissed as inconsequential. I sat there, numb, as the numbers were read aloud. The amount left for me after the division was a greatly diminished share, Barely enough, Brenda whispered, to cover my legal debts. No financial leverage, no fresh start, just a heavier burden. Clara's furious outburst in the courtroom, her shriek of gold-digging hick, was the exclamation point on my public execution. It solidified the public's perception, fueled by the Jensen's media machine, of me as the villain. Across the courtroom, Walter Jensen offered a satisfied smirk, a brief, triumphant flash that spoke of my total financial and social ruin. The war was over, and he had won. In the aftermath, the condo, our last shared asset, had to be sold. It went quickly, almost as quickly as my life had fallen apart. The proceeds, after the lawyers and the banks took their cuts, amounted to little for me. I was effectively homeless, adrift. Finding new employment proved impossible. Every application, every interview, was met with polite but firm rejections. My reputation was irrevocably damaged, a poisoned well by the Jensen's smear campaign. No one wanted to hire the man publicly labeled a cheat and a fraud. Summit Sports, the place that had been my anchor for so long, quietly let me go, citing corporate restructuring. Sarah, after her testimony, had left town without a backward glance. There were no hushed phone calls, no stolen moments. The affair, born of loneliness and fleeting connection, offered no solace or support in my downfall. She had her own life to rebuild, far from the wreckage of mine. I ended up in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with peeling paint and a constant smell of stale cigarettes. My life had been reduced to a single suitcase, holding the few belongings that still felt like my own. Each night I stared at the stained ceiling, the buzzing neon sign outside my window casting a sickly glow. I reflected on my choices, the small deceptions, the whispered lies, the silent resentment. Each one a tiny tremor, leading to the catastrophic earthquake that had swallowed my life whole. The stark contrast between my initial dreams of a simple outdoor shop, built on honesty and hard work, and my current reality in a dingy motel room was a painful, bitter pill to swallow. The anger towards Clara, towards the Jensens, slowly began to recede, replaced by a cold, numbing regret. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the man I had become, the man I had allowed myself to become. I realized the true cost of my betrayal extended far beyond financial loss. It had cost me my dignity, my good name, and any semblance of the future I had once envisioned. The loneliness I once felt with Clara was nothing compared to the profound isolation I now faced, entirely of my own making. The motel room became my world. Each morning, the same cheap coffee, the same news channel, babbling ignored headlines. My days were a rhythm of searching for odd jobs, manual labor that paid cash under the table, away from background checks and curious questions. I stacked shelves in a dingy warehouse for a while, then washed dishes in a greasy diner where no one knew my name. The silence was louder than any argument. Clara, the Jensens, Sarah, they were ghosts in the periphery, fading with each passing week, yet their impact remained. The dream of my own outdoor shop, once a vibrant ambition, was now a distant echo, replaced by the stark reality of needing enough money for the next week's rent. I understood then, in the quiet solitude of that motel room, the full measure of what I had lost. It wasn't just the lottery money, or the condo, or the reputation. It was the possibility of a different life, one built on authenticity, however modest. The cold realism of my new existence was a constant, tangible reminder of my choices. Sometimes I'd see a familiar face from my old life in the grocery store, their eyes catching mine for a split second before they quickly looked away. No anger, no pity, just a quiet turning of the head. That was often harder to bear. There was no grand revelation, no sudden path to redemption. Just the quiet, enduring consequences of my actions, settling in like the dust that collected on the motel windowsill. My life was now irrevocably defined by that single, fateful scratch-off ticket and the choices I made once its power was revealed. The story of Hank Olson is a stark reminder of how quickly life can unravel when faced with temptation and the consequences of fractured trust. From his humble beginnings at Summit Sports, Hank harbored a quiet dream, a simple ambition that was slowly overshadowed by the dazzling world of the Jensens. His initial connection with Clara, born of a shared desire for authenticity, gradually succumbed to the pressures of disparate realities and the insidious influence of her powerful family. The affair with Sarah, a desperate attempt to feel seen and valued, led him down a path of deception, each lie a small chisel chipping away at his integrity. The lottery win, once a beacon of freedom, transformed into a cruel irony, trapped within the confines of a prenup he thought would never matter. His choices, the secret keeping, the betrayal, culminated in a public downfall orchestrated by the very family he tried to escape. Stripped of his fortune, his reputation, and his relationships, Hank was left with the cold, hard truth of his own making, a life defined by what he lost rather than what he had hoped to gain.